Almost 100 days since the bitterly contested Congolese elections, newly elected members of parliament, or deputies as they are commonly referred to, are progressively settling in. This is not without any controversy, as many UDPS members, the main opposition party, have boycotted the early plenaries as a sign of protest over the misfortunes of their political leader in the presidential elections back in November 2011. With around 19,000 candidates hardly fighting for the 500 parliamentary seats nationwide, one wonders how long victorious candidates will resist the temptation of one of the highest paid jobs in the land. Meanwhile, here in London, we sat down to look through the eyes of two members of the Congolese diaspora in the UK who took the trip down in DRC and officiated as observers during the elections. Let's listen to their respective accounts.
I was in Congo during the elections, and from what I experienced in Congo where I was based, is that there was a massive enthusiasm for the elections. People came out in their thousands and thousands. I met a woman who was 72 years old. She had traveled for miles, and I met her at the polling station at 5 in the morning, 5 a.m. And we waited together a few hours because the polling station opened. A few hours later, we waited together until the polling station opened for her to vote. And when I spoke to her, and she said she felt it was a civic duty to turn up and vote. And one of the things that I drew from that experience is that the Congolese people are by nature, by blood I could argue, or genetic, that we are Democrats. We do value and enjoy democracy, the freedom to pick our leaders. And clearly my experience in Congo doesn't reflect the reality of what happened in the Kivus, or Katanga, or Kasai, or Equateur, for instance.
During the elections in November in Congo, I was an observer in Beni, which is a town in North Kivu, near the Uganda border. I was actually supposed to go to Butembo, which is just south of Beni. However, because of insecurities in that area, I was advised not to go, not to continue my journey, and I ended up staying in Beni. My experiences of Beni were peculiar. There were happy times, sad times. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I love to travel. I've traveled the world, and Beni really, I was in awe of the scenery, of the hills, of the beauty, and of the potential that the town has. Once I arrived in Beni, I started going around to different polling stations and going to the Seni offices to see how the elections were coming along. And it was really interesting to see a lot of people who had been employed by Seni as Seni agents. So for example, you'd have Président du Bureau de Vote, Président du Centre de Vote, those kind of Seni agents who were extremely keen. They were very passionate about their work. They took it very seriously. They followed every single rule and regulation within the electoral law. So it was great to see the sense of enthusiasm that they had. But even though there was a lot of enthusiasm, there were also shortcomings in terms of logistics, because there is such poor infrastructure out there, and at times they experienced communication issues. There were communication issues, between the agents and the Seni officers themselves. You can see that they were slightly struggling.
The way forward, which we have been advocating since the whole mess of the presidential election, is that we need a re-elections. That, I think, it's the only way, the only credible way that we can establish with some degree of certainty who actually won the elections and by how many percent that person or that woman or that man actually won elections. And in the meantime, one of the things that we've always argued is that we need to have a caretaker government. We cannot allow Kabila to remain or to lead us, to lead the Congo into another elections. And that caretaker government must be a kind of technocratic government. we can essentially replicate what's been done, let's say, in Italy, and try to do the thing in Congo. There has been talks of national union, union national and so forth. It's simply going to reinforce the wrongs of stealing election in that part of the world. So a technocratic government in place that would lead us into another election in few months or few years. I think that is the way forward.
I got to see places where the bulletins de vote were kept, and the conditions under which the people who were handling the bulletins de vote were working in really shocked me. You know, you had people who I perceived as boys, I didn't get the chance to ask them their ages. You got people who seemed like little boys working in horrible conditions. They were really, really thirsty. I had to give them water, and I thought, okay, that was it on. And I hope for the next time Sydney organises something, they'd be a bit more organised in that respect. And many centres de vote, on the day before the elections, around noon, they still hadn't had all of the materials that they needed. For example, some places were lacking urns, some places were lacking the actual bulletin de vote, some places were lacking, you know, the PV, procès-verbal. So that was a bit worrying, but what kept me motivated was the fact that even though things were lacking, even though they were experiencing difficulties, the actual agents themselves had loads of enthusiasm. They were ready to vote for their leader. That was good. On the day of the vote, myself and my team, we went out at about 5 in the morning. We went to our very first centre de vote. We all entered the bureau de vote that we were going to observing. And before even entering the bureau de vote, there was a massive crowd at the site I was in. Massive queues. Everybody was ready to vote. They wanted to vote for their leader, the person who they wanted to lead them. They wanted to exercise their civil duty. That was great. Everything was under control. It was very peaceful. That was excellent. And within the bureau de vote themselves, the agents, the secrétaire, the president, they were all, from what I experienced in the very first bureau de vote I went to, they all followed the electoral law. They knew the electoral law very well. When I questioned them and asked them, you know, what they were doing and why they were doing it, they knew their stuff. They allowed political witnesses to enter, to also observe and to ensure that, you know, no cheating and no irregularities were going on. So in Bénéville, where I observed the first processes, everything was wonderful. Then I went off into Béni Territoire, which is, you know, on the outskirts of Bénéville, where it's a little more rural, less urban, and then things became a bit more chaotic in the sense that I went to some sites that didn't have enough bulletins de vote, and even though they didn't have enough bulletins de vote, people from the city office came and took some bulletins de vote to other places which were more secluded, which didn't have anything, and I thought that was a bit strange, and I hope that next time that elections take place, they will be more organised in that respect. But again, generally, all of the presidents of the centre de vote and all of the agents, they followed the electoral law to great depth. But one thing that concerned me was once I went to a site where they're a bit less professional. You can imagine in villages and in rural areas, the illiteracy rates are quite high. So you'd have old ladies and old men, and sometimes even pygmy coming to vote who were illiterate, who couldn't read and write. And some agents were good in the sense they explained how to vote, etc. But others were a bit ignorant and less helpful. One experience that really struck me in a bad way, and one that I will never forget, was when a visually impaired lady came to vote. She entered, and one of the agents noticed that she couldn't see, and burst into tears, burst into laughter, sorry. So all of the other agents were wondering, why are you laughing? What's so funny? What's so funny? What's the joke? And the agent said, look, a blind person's come to vote, why is she here? And I just couldn't believe it, because it made me wonder, does it mean that because she cannot see like us, does it mean that she doesn't have the same rights as us to vote? It was really strange for me, and their lack of professionalism really left a bad taste in my mouth. But other than that, all the other agents, as I've said before, were extremely professional. They knew their stuff. They received rigorous training. They followed the electoral law. They didn't do what they deemed as they followed the electoral law, which was excellent. Towards the end, I went to my very last bureau de vote, where we entered the counting, so it became the bureau de dépouillement. And again, the president was excellent. The political witnesses were there. They were all present. We all literally voted, and not voted, sorry, all literally counted together. Every single bulletin of vote would be shown. We would all see where the mark, the cross, the fingerprint was. Everyone was there to witness. So it was an enjoyable experience. When we had finished, it was great. I spoke to the president. He thanked me. I thanked him. It was time to leave, and then all of a sudden, it became difficult to leave because every centre de vote has security, who happen to either be police officers or members of the army, and they wouldn't let me leave the site. Well, I can understand now, because on the morning of the election, the Beni prison was broken into, and allegedly by my members, and 200 prisoners escaped, which included some 20 to 30 ex-militia, ex-rebel inmates. So yeah, that was a scary experience. But the way the police officers handled it, or the soldiers, whatever they were, the way they handled it was extremely and excessively aggressive. And they even resorted to pushing me back into the bureau de vote, when they could have easily just explained to me what had happened and asked me, or even advised me to stay. So it was really interesting, because it made me wonder, are these police officers here to physically abuse the population, or are they here to protect them? I don't know. Maybe that was just their way of expressing themselves. I don't know. But then, because around the time of the elections, security became an issue, I wasn't able to stay in Beni and in Kinshasa as long as I was supposed to. So shortly after, I was evacuated, and I came back to England. That is my story.
But one conclusion that we can draw from the elections, the presidential specifically, is that, as also known as beautifully portrayed, is simply that the results do not represent justice. They do not reflect the voters. And this is one fact which the Culture Centre and the EU and many other local and international nations have talked about. And the implications of that essentially means that we can safely argue that because the Kabila side stole the elections, that Tshisekedi essentially won as the president.
While I was in Beni, I was going around with our civil society partners. So these are members of civil society who are based in and work in Beni. And they told me a really interesting story. Basically, before the presidential election campaign began, a General Congolese came out to Beni and he held a meeting. And he told the Beni population that if they did not vote for Kabila, there would be a war. When I heard this, I was completely shocked, because of course, campaigning before the official dates of the presidential campaign is unlawful. And not only that, surely his statement somehow had an effect on the voting on the election day.